All right, and welcome in everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic, fantabulous, awesome freaking day. My name is Garrett Shumake, and you are listening to the Shumake Take. Welcome in to Predictions versus Reality. The off-season program, content program has finally begun for the Shumake Take, and Predictions versus Reality is a great way to start it. For those of you that have been anticipating Predictions versus Reality or knew that it was coming, go ahead and skip to the next timestamp. But for those of you that are just new, that don't know what's going on, or you're a new viewer, welcome in, by the way, if you are. Predictions versus Reality is a little off-season program, or off-season series, where I will be taking every NFL team, looking back at where I thought they would finish record-wise. I did a predictions video for every conference, and I predicted every team's record in August of 2024, before this NFL season began. And we're going to look back on where I thought they would finish, and then we'll talk about where they actually finished, what went right, what went wrong, what happened if the record was pretty similar, and then we'll look at some other metrics. We'll talk about their best wins, talk about where their offenses and defenses finished, and then we'll look at, the big stat leaders from each position on the team, from passing, rushing, receiving, tackles, sacks, interceptions, and we'll talk about the years that these players had, and then we'll ultimately talk about why I had them finishing, what record I had them finishing, and then what went right, what went wrong, and then we're going to conclude with how each team can get better. And I lied a little bit. I said I was going to start with the AFC. I decided that I'm going to start with the NFC instead, because I thought some of the teams in the NFC were a little bit more interesting to talk about. And with our first team today on the list, there's not very many other interesting teams to talk about than the 2024 Chicago Bears, which, by the way, I'm going to be wearing a shirt that has a color, or like a somewhat matching color of each team. I don't have a Bears shirt. I'm not a Bears fan, so I know one of their colors is orange, of course, so got an orange shirt on for it. But anyways, we are talking about the Chicago Bears of the NFC North, and then we'll work our way up from there. So we'll go Packers, Vikings, Lions next. So a little bit of a sneak peek into what is going to happen. We're going to go north, south, east, west. That's how it's going to go in the division, from fourth to first. And then we'll go to the AFC and do the exact same order of teams. So with the Chicago Bears, I projected them to go 8-9. Their final record was 5-12. A very, very, very big difference compared to where I thought they would be. They had 3 good wins, though, in my opinion. Their best wins: versus LA 24-18, solid win against a playoff team. They beat Carolina 36-10. Now, this was before the second half Carolina Panthers that played much better in the first half, but that was a very dominant win nonetheless. And in my opinion, their best win of the year was in London, where they beat Jacksonville 35-16. Caleb Williams threw 4 touchdown passes. The Bears had went up to a 4-2 record, and it looked like at this point in time, the Bears could look like the team and could be the team that people hyped them up to be. But looking at their offensive and defensive ranks, that simply was not the case. Their offense finished dead last in 32nd, and their defense finished 27th. So very, very, very underwhelming numbers to be, for lack of a better explanation, very, very underwhelming here. And so let's talk, before we talk about the ins and the outs of what happened, let's talk about some of the players that that helped, or I shouldn't say helped, but contributed for the Bears season. Starting with their passing leader, obviously it was number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams out of USC. He ended up completing 62% of his passes, threw for 3,500 yards, 3,541 to be exact, 20 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. He was also the team's second leading rusher, with 81 carries for 489 yards, 0 rushing touchdowns. Caleb Williams, people were hyped up about this guy. People were thinking he was going to be the next CJ Stroud. People thought that because DeAndre Swift was there, who had a good year in Philly before coming to Chicago, they had DJ Moore, they got Keenan Allen, they drafted Rome Odunze 9th overall, 8 spots after Caleb Williams. Right? They had Cole Kmet at tight end, young tackles, right? The offensive line was the biggest question mark, but there was star outside weapons, inside weapons for Caleb Williams to work with. And then defensively, the defense going into the year was thought to be a really good unit. They were a really good unit, and they simply crumbled. But Caleb Williams back in question. Caleb Williams, a lot of people, with all the year being said and done, Caleb Williams did have a better year than people gave him credit for. The thing is, if you don't win games as a quarterback, that is a huge knock on you, and people tend to look past everything else. And everyone looked past everything else because people got hyped up for Caleb Williams, and when the team inevitably didn't deliver, people started blaming somebody, and that somebody was Caleb Williams, player-wise, I should say. The person that got blamed the most was Manny Eberflus. We'll talk about him in a minute. But Caleb Williams, overall, I would say quietly, he had a very solid rookie year. 3,500 yards, 20 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions. The 62% completion percentage is not perfect, but for a rookie, these numbers overall are not that bad. They're actually pretty decent compared to looking at what other players, rookie quarterbacks, had in their rookie years in the past few years, and they're pretty comparable, actually. So Caleb Williams wasn't that bad throwing the football and running around. The big issue with Caleb Williams was that he played outside of structure way too much. And a lot of the sacks that that went on the offensive line, a lot of them were on Caleb Williams. So people talked about that, people complained about that, and that was his biggest knock on him coming out of college, was that he does not play in structure. He plays outside of structure way too much, and NFL defenses were going to clamp down on it, and they did. And this played a big part in why the offensive efficiency was so far down all the way through to the last final games of the year. But he wasn't alone. He wasn't the only thing that technically underwhelmed in the Chicago Bears team. DeAndre Swift, 253 carries, 959 yards, 6 touchdowns. On paper, not a bad year. But then you look at 3.8 yards per carry. And then you look at some of the games he had where he was an absolute non-factor. You saw issues where he was not hitting the proper hole. He was not diagnosing plays right. He was running into his own lineman. He was running into contact instead of trying to make a man miss where he had a wide open lane. DeAndre Swift simply was not efficient this year at all. He was not an efficient running back. And when they signed him, I thought that they would draft someone or really get somebody else to pair with him, and they didn't. The thing DeAndre Swift is not a power. He's not a number one workhorse back that you give 20 plus carries a game to all the time. That's not who DeAndre Swift is. He can be a number one back in a committee, right? He was kind of in and out of the rotation in Detroit where he started. Then he went to Philly and he was the lead back in that committee, and he played really well, ran for 1,000 yards, and he goes to Chicago to be the lead back again. And I don't know if they just thought he was ready for a bigger role, or they just simply didn't do enough to build and put around him to help him get some of that weight off his shoulders. But either way, DeAndre Swift was trying to be that guy this year and simply couldn't be. He simply did not perform enough. The running game overall for Chicago was terrible because outside of Caleb Williams and DeAndre Swift, no one else had more than 200 yards on the team. They were 31st in rushing offense. They were terrible. They were terrible running the football as a team, and that does not help your rookie quarterback who's trying to adjust to the NFL, try and get comfortable. And his receivers didn't give him that much help either. DJ Moore finished with 98 catches, 966 yards, 6 touchdowns. A down year compared to earlier DJ Moore years, and probably what he would, not up to standard, what he would think is up to par. But overall, he did have a decent year. Had a couple bad games where he didn't do a whole lot, but he was by far the most reliable receiver in Chicago. He is still a very good receiver. He is still a big play, deep shot threat. He showed all of that this year. He just took a step down because running the football was not as effective, and he was dealing with a rookie quarterback with a bad offensive line. So naturally, with a bunch of working pieces behind you, when you're trying to run routes and get open, when all that bull crap is running on behind you, it's going to hurt your production a little bit. So DJ Moore, obviously the numbers are not as great as anyone would want him to be, including himself, but overall, he still had a very good year given the circumstances. The second guy, Keenan Allen, 70 catches, 744 yards, 7 touchdowns. He was fine. but he really started to show his age this year. And that's why the Chargers had gotten rid of him and decided to move on, because he was getting up there in age. And, when you have an aging slot receivers, the thing that really makes them go is their agility, quickness, and their speed. But as you begin to get older, obviously you lose some of those physical attributes. And he had a couple games there where he, showed like prime vintage, Keenan Allen, but there was other games where he would go straight quiet. And I believe he also got hurt at some point during the year too and missed a few games, so that also did not help. While Keenan Allen was a, highly valued addition to the Chicago Bears when he first got there, compared to what people thought he would be and what he would bring, he definitely under-delivered. And Rome Odunze was a similar way. Rome Odunze was considered a young, deep shot, big physical X-receiver, and he only had 54 catches, 734 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He was fine. For rookie receiver standards, he was fine. But you look at Marvin Harrison Jr., you look at Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, you look at Ladd McConkey, you look at some of these guys, excluding Marvin Harrison Jr., guys that went after him really outperformed him a lot, especially Ladd McConkey and Brian Thomas Jr., right? Those guys, Brock Bowers even, really outplayed Rome Odunze. And Rome Odunze, he was a rookie, right? And with the rest of the stuff around him, we probably did not see all that he could do. But he had a couple good games. He played well for the most part. And for a rookie receiver, those are not bad numbers. They're kind of comparable to maybe, who's another rookie receiver that had similar numbers? I'm trying to think. The first one that pops to mind is Marvin Harrison, but his numbers are bigger than what I'm thinking they are right now. But overall, I would say the rookie year, underwhelming, but pretty solid nonetheless. And then Cole Kmet, 47 catches, 474 yards, 4 touchdowns. He was kind of underwhelming. He had the really good game in London against Jacksonville that people remember. But other than that, he wasn't particularly explosive. He was just kind of more of a security blanket, which is fine. That works. I mean, there's a role for that. I mean, if you can be a security blanket in an NFL offense as a tight end, you're doing a good thing. But Cole Kmet is supposed to be one of the more explosive. He's supposed to be a top 10 tight end. He did not look like a top tight end this year. And then DeAndre Swift, I think I mentioned 42 catches, 386 yards. After DeAndre Swift, no one else on the team had more than 17 catches, which stands to one of the big issues with this team is wide receiver or just receiving depth in general, which we'll talk about here in a minute in a little bit more detail. But on offense, simply put, I mean, you can't get out more underwhelming than a bunch of playoff hype, top 10 offense potential to be finishing dead last in the NFL. That is that's more than just underwhelming. That's just not even showing up. At that point, the team might as well have never just left the building and left the team hotel to go play games. Like that, it's that bad. It was that freaking bad on offense. And then on defense, you mentioned wasn't much better, but individually, there were some players that did play well. First off, Kevin Byard, free safety for the Bears, finished with 130 tackles, had a couple sacks, 5 tackles for loss, 7 pass deflections, 1 interception. The numbers aren't particularly big, but Kevin Byard's a veteran safety. He's bounced around a little bit. He ended his, was in Tennessee for so long, was a staple of their defense. He was traded to Philly, and he kind of looked washed over there, and then went to Chicago and played better midway through the year. I think it was last year. I can't remember when he went to Chicago, but this year was his first full season as a Bear, and he played pretty darn well in one of the few bright spots of the Bears defense. TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmunds, the two linebackers over the middle of the field, they played pretty well. TJ Edwards had 129 tackles, Tremaine had 110, and their numbers were pretty decent. They had pretty decent years. But the issue of this defensive line, I just kind of spoiled it. The issue with this defense was a defensive line. The leading the guy that led the team in sacks was Montez Sweat with 5.5, and I don't think he played that many games from what I remember. I don't believe that he only had 5.5 sacks in a 17-game span, considering how good he was in 2023. I think he missed games in somewhere. I think I may have just forgotten to write that down. Chicago Bears fans, let me know in the comments down below and verify the information for me. I would greatly appreciate it. But other than that, Gravon Dexter had 5, and then TJ Edwards, as I just mentioned, had 4. I mean, this is not production you want to have. The Bears finished like middle of the road in sacks, so they weren't bad, but they also weren't good either. And then you add on that they were bottom 8 or bottom 9 in the NFL in run defense. Their run defense was what really killed this unit. And when you're getting run all over and you can't sustain drives, you can't get off the field on third down, which they were able to do pretty well, actually, if I remember correctly. But either way, when you can't, let me explain this right. The thing is with having a good run defense is that if you don't have a good run defense, you don't get into third down very often because you're getting into first and short. You're getting into second and short. And then, you're getting gashed in the run game. You're going to get a couple holding calls in there too. A couple defensive penalties are going to end up flying a little bit more because of it. And when you can't get to third down and you can't get the offense into a favorable situation or unfavorable situation, favorable for your defense, your passing game doesn't really matter. Because it's the same thing. Like, if you're going to run the ball and it's working, you're going to keep running it until they prove they can stop it. And for the Chicago Bears, that happened to them a lot, where they got ran on so much that their secondary, which honestly is where their strong suit is of their defense, was slowed down, hampered, in some games completely eliminated because the run defense was so bad. And going into the interceptions, talking about DBs for a second, Jalen Johnson and Tyreek Stevenson, their 2 corners finished with 2. A whole bunch of other guys finished with 1. But the one knock I can say on this defense, other than the defensive line and their run defense, was that this team, they did finish in the upper half of the league in turnovers. I think they finished just outside the top 10. The thing was, they had some games where they had a bunch of turnovers, and then they had games where they had none. And the games where they had none, looking at their numbers and statistics, it's a completely different football team. When this team was able to get turnovers, they were a decent unit. Like they were playing well. They were competitive, right? But when they couldn't get takeaways, that's where their biggest blowouts happened. That's where their biggest disasters of losses happened, was in those types of moments. But to conclude with everything that was just said, why ultimately did I have the Bears finishing 8 and 9? I will say that I was one of the few people that at the time people were hyping up Chicago. I was one of the few people telling others that you need to hold on to your expectations. You need to hold your horses, pump the brakes, because the Bears, I said the Bears were not going to be a playoff team. I don't think they're going to reach 10 wins, 10 plus wins like people said they would. I was like, no, that is not happening. And why? You had a rookie quarterback, which every time in the NFL now, if you start a rookie quarterback day one, expect them to have struggles. Expect them to look bad at the start of a year. In my opinion, this is a completely different topic for another day. Rookie quarterbacks should not be starting day one anymore. They should not. Even if they're ready to start day one, no, you should never start a rookie quarterback day one. College programs aren't doing enough anymore to invest in quarterback development for the NFL. And also, the NFL has gotten so much, the gap between college and the pros has gotten noticeably bigger because NFL offenses and offensive schemes have gotten so much more different and diverse and creative compared to what they were even 5 years ago. So the gap is bigger. You're starting a quarterback in a situation where, doesn't have the time to sit and adjust to the pro game. He's gonna have early season struggles. And I expected this. I don't know why people thought he would do well. It's not just having a great team around you. You gotta be ready for the situation. There's a reason why Patrick Mahomes sat for a year, because he was not ready to start, and they decided they were gonna work on him and develop him and let him adjust. And so by the time he's ready, he is actually familiar with everything that he's looking at. And look at where he is right now, right? This is why you sit rookie quarterbacks at all times, in my opinion, even if they are deemed ready to start. But that's not how the economics of the NFL works. That being said, the rookie quarterback, Caleb Williams, was a reason why I said this team would not meet expectations. The second one was an unproven offensive line. Their tackles, Braxton Miller and Darnell Wright, At the time, I was not concerned about. The interior is what I was concerned about. They were bad in 2023, and in 2024, there wasn't much done to fix it. So in my mind, I was like, let's see how. I don't think this is going to end well. I'm very unsure about this group. And then, of course, the big one was head coach Matt Eberflus. Matt Eberflus, even from that point on, I was not convinced at all that he was the guy to lead this team into the future with a rookie quarterback. I thought it was a terrible move keeping him. I thought after 2023, he should have been fired. I thought he should have been fired. I thought he should have been canned because he was simply not a good head coach. I think every Bears fan will tell you that even before this year started, Matt Eberflus is not a good head coach. So I don't know why the Bears kept him, but they kept him, and look at where it got them. That being said, 8-9 was a solid record. This was a record that I thought was attainable because even though there's a good team, look, there's going to have their struggles, right? Like I mentioned, but this team on paper looked still good enough to be competitive and win games. 8-9 is not something to gawk at under, rookie quarterback in year one. I know people were going to hype him up, and obviously that was going to fall short of expectations, finishing 8-9, but I thought that was very realistic for the reasons I just said. The thing was, people, like I mentioned, people expected CJ Stroud 2.0, and that's the exception. That's not the rule. And people got caught up in all the flash and the hype. And while I thought, Chicago Bears going 8-9 was respectable, part of me in the back of my mind was like, this is a great team on paper. People are trying to make legitimate cases for them to being good. Okay, Chicago Bears, the ball's in your court. You got a great team. Okay, tell me, how are you going to mess this up? Well, they more than just messed it up. They completely showed that the Chicago Bears are nowhere near closer to where they thought they would be at the end of 2024 compared to 2023. This team got literally nowhere. Record-wise, they took a step back. They went 7-10 in 2023 with Justin Fields at quarterback, and then they won only 5 games with Caleb Williams. So some people would say they took a step backward. In my opinion, they didn't go anywhere. They got this great team, and they had nothing to show for it, practically. So what exactly went wrong for the Chicago Bears? Well, the first one, as I mentioned, was Matt Eberflus. Horrible head coach, right? Can't control clock. We all remember the game on Thanksgiving against Detroit where he had a timeout left, spent 40 seconds not doing anything, didn't call a timeout, and the Bears lost the game on one final play, right? And also, he had terrible coaching hires. A lot of these coaches after the year got fired, one of them being Shane Waldron, and I talked about going into my NFC schedule preview video back in August that I liked the move of Shane Waldron. He was coming from Seattle. Seattle's offense was pretty good under him, and so I thought, hey, you get a guy that has some good upside as an offensive coordinator, not a highly coveted guy, but a guy that is a good coach to coach Caleb Williams with a great roster around him, great pieces to work with. I thought this offense would be good. At least, good. Not great, but I thought they'd be pretty darn good. And he obviously didn't cut it, and now there's rumors that he didn't watch film with Caleb Williams, which I find incredibly hard to believe. And then guys like Thomas Brown, who is a good coach, got thrown too much on his plate. He was an assistant coach or a position coach, and then after Waldron got fired, he became the interim offensive coordinator, and he was trying to balance that out, and then Matt Eberflus got fired, and he had to become the interim head coach. So, immediately, he just got thrown all of this bull crap BS on his plate that he did not sign up for. And it's sad because, like I said, Thomas Brown's a good coach. He was interviewed for multiple head coaching positions last year in last year's coaching cycle. So he's not a bad coach. He's a pretty good coach. He comes from the Sean McVay coaching tree, right? He's very well liked and very well respected by players. He's a good coach. He's a good guy, right? So to see him, take a lot of blame, take a lot of, stuff, right? A lot of this dysfunction that Chicago Bears had. And, of course, I'm not going to fault him for not doing better than Matt Eberflus because, come on. It's like if you're working an office job and then let's say your manager gets fired, okay, you got to step up and take over his work. And then your manager's manager gets fired and you got to take over his work. And at that point, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do, actually? It's not, Like, you got to try and do your job. You're trying to do three people's jobs at one time. And it's like, how are you supposed to do that? How are you supposed to take time out of your day to address the whole team in team meetings? How are you supposed to all of a sudden be able to run the offense and call plays and, game plan, scheme stuff up? And then meanwhile, you're a position coach and you got to talk with your position, right? Like, how do you manage all that? That's just so hard. It's such an unfair situation. So for Thomas Brown, I don't know where he's going to go, but I hope that he goes into a place where he is going to be well loved. He's going to be there for a while, and he can continue to build his game. I think he can be a head coach one day. He's a guy to keep your eye on in that department. But Matt Eberflus, honestly, he was my one truly, truly big knock, and probably the sole reason I believe this team would fail. If there was an avenue for this team to disappoint people and finish how they finished and absolutely, utterly fail, worst case scenario, Matt Eberflus was going to get the biggest piece of blame pie, and practically that dude got 95% of the pie. 95% of it, at least, right? I think a lot of people would agree when I say that. The second thing that went wrong for them was the offensive line. It simply was not it. The numbers show that they were better than they looked, but when you look at them on film and you watch a Chicago Bears game, they were terrible. They were absolutely terrible. Darnell Wright, he was fine, but outside of that, they have no stars or high-end potential on this offensive line. Braxton Jones, he was inconsistent. He's going to be there next year, and I'm hoping that he gets better coaching and developing, because I meant to say not talent. When I said not talent, I wasn't talking about Braxton Jones. He's a talented player. But this interior of the offensive line is straight up garbage. It is straight up garbage, and it needs a massive, massive overhaul. But that wasn't the only thing that went wrong. I also mentioned before, DeAndre Swift was also very disappointing. And then I also mentioned Caleb Williams as well, and how a lot of the sacks that the Chicago Bears allowed, a lot of them were directly responsible, or Caleb Williams was directly responsible for them. So, obviously, with all that being said, this offense was looking at it, there were so many things that went wrong with this offense. It's no wonder why they finished 32nd, despite all the talent that they have. It's that they had all the flash. The flash was good, right? All the receivers, collectively had a good year, right? Caleb Williams very quietly had a decent year. But if you don't have a good running game and you don't have a good offensive line, none of it matters. None of it matters. You can have the most talented quarterback in the NFL. People talk about all the time, X quarterback would do terrible with X team. There's a reason why that argument exists. Because the situation around a quarterback matters so much. You could literally I will agree with you, people that say this, you could put Patrick Mahomes in the Chicago Bears offense, and would he make it better? Yes. Definitely. You can't compare Caleb Williams to Patrick Mahomes. It's comparing A to Z right now. But at the same time, Patrick Mahomes would have some struggles with how bad this offensive line was. They would have some struggles, and with a lack of running game. Look at Patrick Mahomes this year. He struggled. He didn't have elite playmakers anywhere. And obviously, his numbers dipped because of it. He had terrible tackles. The production dipped because of it. So, there is that. And then, defensively, they were a good unit last year. But with the offensive ineptitude, this defense, at the end of the year, completely just fell apart. They were not, like I mentioned, they're not good against the run. They were mid at getting to the quarterback. And the offense really just weighed them down. And the defensive line, it is relatively young, so that is a factor. But that's not to say that they don't need to add something to it to make it better. So how do we make it better? Well, Ben Johnson is the new head coach. I wanted Chicago Bears to hire an offensive head coach last offseason when they were going to draft Caleb Williams, and they didn't. So now, Ben Johnson, you get a very highly coveted head coach, which that's a good move on paper. Check. It's not good that Caleb Williams and this whole offense has to learn a new scheme, but looking at Ben Johnson's offense over the past few years in Detroit, what better offense is there to learn right now? So there is some good, there is some bad with it, but fixing like the team wise, this team, the Bears, they need to invest on the interior offensive line specifically. I'm thinking, I had it written here that you need to draft Will Campbell or Kelvin Banks. Maybe you do. There's some concerns with Kelvin Banks and Will Howard that with their arm lengths, one of these guys could move into kick into guard. And probably Kelvin Banks, for example, he's a really good tackle prospect, but there is legitimate reasoning to think that he could be better at guard. He reminds me a lot of Peter Skoronski in that way. So maybe I'm Will Howard I'm talking about. One of them was really seriously considered being a guard. I think it may have been Kelvin Banks. I'm not sure. But another guy that's big up there is Tyler Booker, the guard out of Alabama, right? I'm picking him at 11th or 12th, where the Bears are picking. They're just outside the top 10. Or no, they're in the top 10, actually, right? Yeah, no, they're in the top 10. So drafting Tyler Booker there would be a reach. So maybe you trade down, right? Or you can draft an edge rusher, and they need another edge rusher. They need more depth on the defensive side of the ball in general. So maybe you draft like a Nick Scarton, or you draft a Michael Williams, right? At that point, well, Abdul Carter is going to be off the board. You know, those are kind of the next guys available. So maybe you take one of those guys there, and then maybe you draft like a guard in the second. You know, another option is free agent guard Trey Smith. He's one of the best free agents available. He's one of the guys, or the Bears are one of the teams that are going to be in the Trey Smith sweepstakes. And if I'm Chicago, I'm going to give this guy buku bucks to play for this team. Because you get Trey Smith and Darnell Wright on the right side, right? And then you have Braxton Jones on the left side, and you draft a rookie guard in the second round, third round, right? Center, maybe you sign one in free agency, like a 1-year deal, and draft one as well. Maybe like late day 3, you can develop or bring in like an undrafted free agent or something like that, right? You know, there is an avenue for the Bears to go around and, plug in the holes on this offensive line, at least most of them on the interior, and get some better coaching, and you can have an improved unit here. There's an avenue here for it to happen. Along with that, you got to draft another running back to pair with DeAndre Swift and take some of the pressure off. Now, what type of running back you go for, I'm not sure. Do you go for more of a power back? You know, I'm looking at like Ollie Gordon, right? I can't remember if he's out of Mississippi, or I can't remember where Ollie Gordon's coming out of off the top of my head, but he's a power back, right? You can get a guy like that. Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, he fits that mold. And then you get guys like Omari and Hampton out of North Carolina, who's more of a speed guy, so that fits more of the DeAndre Swift mold, I think. I'm not 100% on Omari and Hampton's draft profile, so don't come after me if I'm 100% wrong on this. It's just from what I've kind of seen on the outside looking in. I'm not a North Carolina fan. I don't follow the Tar Heels, right? I'm an SEC guy, so I don't follow North Carolina, who's in like the ACC, right? That's not me. But either way, you need to draft a running back on day 2, day 3 to pair with DeAndre Swift and take some of the pressure off. If you have a good running back duo in there, that'll actually do a lot to help the rest of this offense and really help this offensive line as well, believe it or not. And they also need wide receiver depth. I mentioned that no receiver after DeAndre Swift had more than 20 catches. That's terrible. That is absolutely terrible. Now, I get it. The Bears didn't throw the ball. You know, they weren't a very high volume passing team. But at the same time, I mean, you got to be able to get some production. And then also, DJ Moore got hurt. Rome Odunze got hurt at points. Keenan Allen got hurt at points. And when those guys were not on the field, their lack of presence on the field showed a lot in very ugly ways. And the offense, as my tablet falls down, got even worse than it already was. So adding receiver depth will be huge, right? I'm looking at, maybe a late, like 6th, 7th round receiver. I'm looking at, adding like a couple, maybe like one guy in free agency, a couple undrafted free agents. Get younger at the position, because DJ Moore, he's a veteran. Keenan Allen, he may not be, on the team next year, right? So wide receiver could be a bigger need than I'm thinking about right now, and other people might be thinking about as well if Keenan Allen decides to leave. But some part of me does think he will be back. I think with Ben Johnson and the coaching staff that he's building over there, I think it's going to convince him to stay and think, okay, maybe last year was just we had terrible coaching, and with better coaching, we will be a much better football team. So maybe he stays. And going back to the defensive side, I mentioned, getting an edge rusher, which they could use with their first round pick. But I also could think maybe you draft a safety as well with Kevin Byard getting up there in age. I don't know if he's going to be there next year. He could be cut if he's not a free agent. So that could also be an issue, right, that needs to be addressed. But honestly, I feel like if with a better defensive coordinator, they hired Dennis Allen, the former Saints head coach, who's a good defensive mind. He was a good defensive coordinator when Sean Payton was the head coach. People tend to forget that. No, he was a good defensive coordinator when Sean Payton was there. So anyways, that being said, I feel like a lot of the issues on this defense were due to not having a lot of talent up front. And also, the offense was just super bad. I feel like if this offense was a middle-of-the-road defense, this defense also probably would have finished slightly above average at bare minimum. I think there's a scenario. I mean, look at 8-9 where I have them finishing. That is usually what an 8-9 team looks like. One side of the ball is like a above average unit, while one's a mid-tier unit, and that's usually what an 8-9 team looks like I mentioned. So that's that checks out. And I feel like if this offense gets better, this defense is going to make a significant jump from where they finished this year. And that's a real possibility. But with all that being said, the problem with Chicago, the big number one problem is, the front office and, in a way, ownership. That's probably going to change because Miss Hallis, George Hallis' wife, did pass away a few weeks ago. So rest in peace to her. I'm offering my condolences. I'm not going to, talk bad about someone after they passed away. But going back to the Chicago Bears side of things and the team thing, the front office type of thing, looking at, hiring Ben Johnson and the coaches that they've hired, and, they're going to make some of these moves, the moves that they need to make here that I mentioned, a lot of them are probably going to be made. But every time before, the Bears have made the right decisions to get their team right, they find a new way to screw it all up. So right now for the Bears, even though all these things are to get better, there's an avenue where all this stuff can get better. Why should we expect anything different from right now? If they actually improve, it would be awesome. But for right now, I'm going to be in a very serious doubt mode until I see genuine improvement. Now, when we get into, obviously, next August, when we get into schedule predictions, in my mind right now, I'm thinking, okay, they're going to be better than 5-12. There's no way that they get worse or finish 5-12 again, right? But that does not mean that people should be expecting them to make a big jump. 8-9 will probably be this team's record next year. If at least some of these moves they make end up working in their favor. I think 8-9, maybe 9-8 at absolute best, is a solid spot for them. They are a team that could jump. They're a team that could make a big jump. And there's going to be people, Bears fans are going to be hyping this team up to no end if the Bears make a lot of moves this offseason that help this team. But until then, until I genuinely see improvement on the field and on the win column, I'm not going to buy into it until I see it actually happen. But with that being said, that is going to do it for the first predictions versus reality video talking about the Chicago Bears. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, letting me know what you think the Bears are going to do this offseason. Do you think they were as bad as they actually were? Do you think I was wrong about some of my takes about the players and about the team? Or if you agree with me, let me know how much you agree with me. Along with that, make sure you guys hit the like button and hit subscribe to the channel. Hitting these two buttons only takes a couple of seconds, and it helps the channel out tremendously into helping me spread my passion for the NFL and spread my passion for football to more of you guys here on this platform that is YouTube. So I would appreciate if you guys would do that. And of course, make sure you guys are sharing the video. Make sure you guys are getting locked in and locked on to the Shumake Take podcast, coming out with great content every week. We got predictions versus reality dropping. These videos are going to drop like flies. You're going to see a couple episodes uploaded here back to back. You're going to see This week you're gonna see Bears, Packers, Vikings, Lions, Saints, Panthers, Falcons, Bucks. All these 8 teams you are going to see this week. So keep an eye out. There's going to be a lot of content, production versus reality content coming out for you guys over these next few weeks as we inch closer and closer to the end of new league year, to free agency, and where we'll actually see what the Chicago Bears will do to make their team better. But that will do it for me today, guys. Hope you guys have enjoyed. I will see you all next time.